Hello, writers, and welcome back to Spooky Writes. My name's Kemal Onor, and today we're going to be continuing on with our conversation about characters. So, today we're going to be focusing in on antagonists. So, cue that thunder and lightning, and let's get into it.
Okay, right.
So, antagonists are not always going to be the villain character, they are going to be the character who is actively working against your protagonist. Now, I think antagonist is one of those characters that a lot of beginning writers will kind of stereotype. They'll dress the antagonist in all in black and they'll make the antagonist just evil for the sake of being evil. This is what you want to avoid when you're writing, when you're working on creating better, more interesting antagonists. And I use the term interesting antagonists because our antagonists shouldn't be evil for the sake of evil. They shouldn't be bad all the time. Like I've been discussing within these videos, we want our characters to have shades of gray. We want characters to be somewhere on a spectrum. We don't want characters to be two-dimensional. We want characters to have depth to them. Characters who have transformation, and we should have the same thing. We should have the same occurrence within our antagonists. A lot of writers will skimp on antagonists because they put so much effort and work into their protagonist, and they feel that their protagonist, who is the good guy, should win and should have the most amount of depth. And this is to a degree true, but you also want to put as much time into your antagonist as you do your protagonist. There shouldn't be, and it shouldn't feel like there's it shouldn't feel like there's a clear it shouldn't feel like there's any favoritism within your writing. It should feel as though that you as the author have put the same amount of time and effort into creating a fully fleshed out protagonist as that of an antagonist. Your antagonist should have motives. Your antagonist should have goals. Your antagonist shouldn't be twirling his mustache saying, yes, I'm going to be evil for the sake of being evil. Your antagonist very much needs to have motives and goals, just as your protagonist does. The only difference is that your antagonist is at opposition with your protagonist, and at some point, this is creating the conflict within your story. And so, ways that you can work on making an antagonist more interesting are going to be very similar to the ways that you make a protagonist interesting as well. You give them goals, you give him or her strengths and weaknesses, you give them a motive. So your antagonist needs to have a reason that he or she is actively working against your protagonist. It shouldn't just be, I am evil for the sake of being evil. Even if you're creating monsters within the horror genre, you want your antagonists, you want your monsters to have reasons. They can be supernatural reasons for why they are doing what they are doing, but it should not just be the case of I am evil for the sake of being evil to further the plot of the story. Your antagonists need to have depth, they need to have desires, they need to have goals, they need to have things that he or she want to achieve. And remember, in the antagonist's eyes, he or she is not the bad guy. He or she is doing what they think is correct. They're doing what they believe to be the right course of action. It just happens to be at opposition with your protagonist character, and that is going to drive the conflict of your story. So very much thinking about ways that your antagonist can have more depth, giving your antagonist more time to develop him or her, really thinking about your antagonist's backstory as much, if not more, than your protagonist character. Because while your protagonist character is the character that your readers are ideally going to root for, your protagonist is the character that your readers are going to say, we want this person to succeed. The challenge is getting them to also sympathize with the antagonist, because the antagonist is a character who's simply who's coming into the story with an opposite view of that of the protagonist. And maybe if we're thinking about, and even if we're thinking about superheroes and how they're supervillains, and supervillains are typically seen as the antagonist to that of our protagonist being the superhero. Again, these are not terms that we want to be using. We very much want to stay away from terms like good guy and bad guy, good woman, bad woman. we don't want to be using these terms within a literary sense. We very much want to be using antagonist to describe the character who is at opposition with that of the protagonist. It is not a character who is evil for the sake of being evil. It is a character who has his or her own backstory, who has his or her own goals and interests. They just, again, happen to be at opposition with that of your protagonist character. Maybe it could even be the case that they're both trying to achieve the same goal, but because the way that the story is written and the point of view of the story is told from perhaps the protagonist character, and maybe their goal is to be the first ones to go to the castle and save the princess, and the antagonist might be the character who is trying to beat them to this goal and trying to do it first. And so thinking about ways that you can get the reader to also sympathize with the antagonist and see the solution from the antagonist's point of view. Again, we don't want our antagonist to be evil for the sake of evil. We want our antagonist to have transformations throughout the course of the work, throughout the course of the novel, just as we want to see the same transformation within our protagonist characters. So that's going to be it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. And if you like this content, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and comment below. Next week, I'm going to be covering side characters. So thank you so much for watching. And as always, keep it spooky.